Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of Citizen University TV. I'm Eric Liu, founder of Citizen University. Today, all across this country, too many Americans believe that they are powerless in the face of a system that is rigged against them. But this is true only if we allow it to be true. And we've created this show to share with you some lessons of civic power that you'll need to take action and have voice in your community. So let's get started. Let us now make our voices heard. I pledge to serve and to push my country. I pledge to live like a citizen. Thanks for being with us. On every episode of Citizen University TV, we're going to explore different dimensions of citizen power. What does it mean to bring people together, to make change, to have voice? When we do this show, it's not only going to be me talking and explaining some different concepts, we're also going to hear from people just like you, from around our city and around the country, who are doing this kind of change-making and concerted action. But first, I'd like to actually define some terms. When I say citizen, what I mean isn't only people who are United States citizens under our immigration laws and documentation status. I mean people who are members of the community, pro-social contributors to the community. That's the broad sense in which we say citizen. The other term that I want to define is this: power. And when I say power, I mean simply the ability to ensure that others do what you want them to do. Now, I grant that can sound a little bit menacing, a little impolite, to say it so bluntly. But if you feel a little bit funny about that definition, I invite you to get comfortable with it. Because it's important to be able to be real about what power is, not only for the purposes of this show, but really for the purposes of trying to make real change in our community. What I'd like to do now is describe 6 different forms of citizen power, ways in which together we do make change and make our voices heard. Well, the first of these forms of power is very basic: physical force. Control over the means of violence. Whether that control resides in a police force, or in an army, or a militia, or some other organized group, physical force is civic power at its most elemental and primal. The second form of citizen power that matters is wealth. Money. Money buys results. Money buys almost any other kind of power. And in this age of inequality that we're living in right now, everybody's realizing in more sharp and heightened ways how wealth and inequities of wealth translate into inequities of voice and access to our own democracy. So wealth is crucial. A third form of citizen power, though, that's just as crucial is state action, by which I mean government. The use of government and bureaucracy and public policy and rulemaking to compel people to do certain things or not do certain things, to define what you can and cannot do in community. State action, in a democracy in particular, is the way that we express collectively how we want to decide to set priorities about behavior, about spending, about our lives together. Well, the fourth form of citizen power, social norms, is another way of getting at the same question. But it doesn't have to be, when you come to social norms, something about the hard, centralized machinery of government. Take an issue like gay marriage or guns. On these issues, social norms, what people believe is okay, what people think is permissible, what people think is normal as a way of behaving and a way of thinking, they can have as much force and influence as state action, even though they're softer and more decentralized. Social norms matter, and they are contagious in ways that other forms of power are not. Well, the same can be said of the fifth form of citizen power, and that's ideas. An idea, maybe it's individual liberty or racial equality. An idea can activate and captivate the imaginations and the beliefs and the attitudes of lots of people. Ideas can move people to organize. Ideas can move people to change the way they see and change the way they behave. And unlike other forms of citizen power, ideas can't be controlled by any one person or any one group. Ideas flow freely, and this form of citizen power is really important for us to explore. The sixth, though, form of citizen power is fundamental. Numbers. Lots and lots of people. When you have lots of people, particularly in a democracy, who are willing to organize, who are willing to protest, who are willing to come to a city council hearing, who are willing to vote, who are willing to tell their neighbors about other issues, numbers matter. Those people make a difference. Those people have force and power in a way that is unique and exceptional in democratic life. So these forms of citizen power that we're talking about here, physical force, wealth, state action, social norms, ideas, and numbers, come into play in every form of our lives together. If you just look around, look at the newspaper, look at the headlines, or take a walk through your own neighborhood in the ways that it's changing. Think about what's happening in the country right now. You'll see all of these different forms of citizen power at play, being activated in one form or another by different people, and you'll see the ways in which they interact with one another. And part of what we're trying to do in this show, and trying to do in general in our work at Citizen University, is to give people more sight, enable them to perceive the ways in which these six forms of citizen power are activated, and the ways in which they interact with one another. Well, what we're going to do today, and we'll be doing this every episode that we have of Citizen University TV, is we're going to take ideas like this and make them concrete in a case study. And here we're going to take a case study from our own city of Seattle, a way in which these forms of citizen power have come to interact with one another. And they've done so through something called democracy vouchers. In November of 2015, the voters of Seattle agreed to create a brand new system of public financing of city elections. And that system is called democracy vouchers. It enables every voter to get 4 $25 vouchers to be able to spend on an election candidate of their choice. That ability to use vouchers to give everyday voters the same kind of voice and access to candidates that donors in campaigns traditionally have had is a brand new idea. In fact, Seattle is the first city in the country to create a system like this of democracy vouchers. As some of you may have noticed, when the democracy vouchers were being debated, there were lots of arguments about whether this was a great way to equalize the power of the people against the power of concentrated money, or whether it was just a dumb way to spend taxpayer dollars on welfare for politicians. But whatever you think about the issue, the fact is that democracy vouchers are a great, great distillation of the six forms of citizen power we've been talking about here, about money, about ideas, about state action, about social norms, about people, about the ways in which ideas shape the frame of the possible. And so we're now going to spend a little bit of time exploring how democracy vouchers work and what they say not only about our city, but about civic power in our country.
The issue of campaign finance reform has been around for decades. There's been an ever-growing concern with just how money flows in politics and the different influences that are at play, and I think people just generally feel like the system's broken. A study came out from the same institute, Cylon Institute, that the way that money flows in Seattle is that candidates typically spend most of their time dialing for dollars and not talking to voters. That really, in order to win, you have to raise a lot of money and you have to spend a lot of time talking to people who will give you money. The democracy voucher idea was something that had never been tried before. The concept of the democracy vouchers is twofold. It's really about putting the power back in the hands of people. So I'm a voter. I get 4 $25 vouchers in the beginning of the year. That now makes me a donor. I'm not just a voter, but I'm now a donor. So I have 4 vouchers that I can give to any candidate of my choosing. I can give them all, or I can give one. And so that will also incentivize candidates to come talk to me at the door, because if they can come and talk to me about the issues I care about and make a compelling case for why I should support them, I can give them these vouchers that I didn't have before. It will allow candidates who who don't have like a strong donor base to become more viable to run a competitive race. I think that's the other thing we see is that in cities where you don't have any kind of public campaign financing, you have a lot of similar people who are tied to money or have a lot of donors in their networks getting elected to office, you don't see a lot of community representation. And we made a commitment early on that we wanted to really elevate communities of color, young people, women, folks who don't feel like they have access to the system. We had a short timeline on this. I mean, really, at the end of the day, we had 5 weeks to get it on the ballot, and we had to raise money to do that. We were fortunate enough to have additional funding come in to help support field efforts for organizations to go out and talk to their community members in culturally appropriate languages, to have community forums. We went into Election Day hopeful, thinking if we're going to win by a small margin. And the results came out, and we came out with a strong 63%, I think, in the first reading, and we just freaked out. It was amazing. I started crying, other people started crying. We were just like, I can't believe, A, that we won, and B, that we won by such a strong margin.
To learn some more about democracy vouchers and the campaign that created them, we're joined now by Esteban Munoz Howard, one of the lead organizers of the Honest Elections Seattle campaign. Esteban, welcome.
Thank you.
So before we actually dive into the campaign, I want to rewind a little bit, because when we were talking earlier, you were describing how this idea didn't just appear on the scene in the 2015 election cycle, that there had been a lot of groundwork laid prior, including a failed ballot measure a few years prior. Talk to me about that path to this campaign.
Yeah, I think the roots of the Honest Elections Seattle campaign actually stretch back to, I guess, 2007. At the time, there were a group of us that were volunteering with, at the time, Washington Public Campaigns, which is now Fix Democracy First, to overturn the ban on public financing in the state. And we were successful, thankfully, and a group of us, I think about 7 of us, broke off and decided to launch a local ballot initiative called Vote Clean Seattle. And in 2008, we went as far as having a large successful kickoff with some featured speakers, raised some money, did some polling, and then the economy tanked, and we decided it wasn't quite the right time. But that was, I think, really the origins of this process, because it was the same folks who were involved in succeeding efforts. In 2012, we got together again and ran the failed 2013 campaign. Although in that...
And that campaign would have done what?
That campaign would have implemented a bare public matching system. It would have been a 6-to-1 super match.
So unlike vouchers, it's a match that if a candidate, well, describe how that would work.
Yeah, so it's similar. It was based on some other programs that exist around the country. There's a really successful one in New York that was credited with the success of Bill de Blasio's mayoral campaign. And essentially, you contribute $10 or $50, and it's matched 6-to-1 with public funds. And so it makes it more feasible for a candidate to engage smaller dollar donors, to be more intentional about reaching more people rather than more money, and it can still run a competitive campaign.
But that failed in 2013.
That failed in 2013 for, I think, a couple of reasons. For one thing, it was a group of 7 of us without a ton of experience and the relationships that I think are really needed to mount a successful campaign. It was also a really short time frame. There are a lot of local organizations, expected partners that already had priorities set for the year, and they just weren't quite ready to shift on the time frame that we were really hoping that they would. But I think in the end, we were able to really fail forward, and this is something we talk about a lot. We were able to build those relationships and show that even though we raised very, very little money and had a very minor campaign, we still got 49.63% of the vote, and we lost by about 1,400 votes. And so I think that was really a sign to folks that there was something here, there was some momentum that we were able to build. And literally the next day, we got phone calls from local partners, from national funders, people were really interested in getting involved.
Saying, let's try this again.
Yeah, they felt like, this was a missed opportunity. And again, for very valid reasons, folks were not engaging in that process originally.
No, but what's interesting, though, is that once you had that moment after the close, almost win in 2013, you didn't just go back in 2015 with the same policy idea. You came back now with this different policy idea of democracy vouchers, which are different from a simple matching system. Why?
Well, we were able to set our sights a little bit higher. That was one thing that I was really excited to see, is that as more people came to the table, we were able to get more voices, more institutional support to do deeper research. And we realized that there was something bigger we could strive for. Actually, in 2014, we did try to go back through City Council and bring another similar bill to the voters the following year. And that failed the summer of 2014.
So you had to go to the people.
Yeah, we were trying to go the council route because we felt like it was going to be a little bit easier if we could just get the votes.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to invest quite as much in the campaign, engaging folks early on. And when that failed, we realized that we don't have to tie ourselves down by what is going to be politically palatable to run through city council. We can actually engage a much broader set of stakeholders in deciding what exactly we want to do, and we can go the initiative route, put it straight to the people.
But also with a more ambitious idea, right? I mean, democracy vouchers had not yet been tried or implemented in the United States.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of us had heard about, we'd read about. It sounded exciting, but there hadn't been a ton of movement on it because it was untried, because nobody had really, nobody had put it forth as a priority, as something that they wanted to test in their own community.
So what strikes me, I mean, when you rewind all the way to 2007, two things in just already what you're saying. Number one, just a hardy little band of people, right,
Yeah.
getting this going. Wasn't some massive alignment of big institutional structures till late in the game. But the other is when you talked about failing forward, I'm wondering how quickly you were able and willing to learn lessons about, that failed because X, and how quickly you were able to apply those lessons of reorganizing power and reactivating things in a different way.
Yeah, I think we were open to learning about it as we went along. I mean, I think we realized some of the mistakes we made in that 2013 campaign, where we realized we should have spent a little bit more time focusing on getting some of those stakeholders together rather than lobbying city council and educating the Seattle Ethics and Elections Commission to make sure that people understood what this could mean for the city.
For the uninitiated, when someone like you says the stakeholders, getting people around the table, I have a very clear picture in my mind, but for someone who may not, what does that mean? Who are you talking about? What has to happen, and how do you get them to this imaginary table?
Yeah, so there's a lot of a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings, but essentially what my mind goes to is this meeting that we had, and I think in February of 2014, is maybe January, February, where we brought together a group of, I think maybe there were 30 people in the room, and that included, there were some elected officials, there were some union folks that were represented there, there's local grassroots organizations, there were individual just community leaders, activists, and we at the time we were called Fair Elections Seattle. And it was just a volunteer grassroots group that was convening these conversations, bringing folks together. And so it was really just calling people that we thought would be interested, that would have a stake in this sort of a campaign, that would also be able to provide something, that would actually want to contribute and participate and provide a little more sustainability to the campaign. Because we were all, as volunteers, we were kind of tapped out at that point. And so it felt really good to have a larger group of folks at the table that could carry more of the weight and make it all much more likely to succeed.
One of the things that the good news about bringing a larger table like that is you have allies and you have other resources to bring to bear. The bad news is, I imagine, it's harder to make decisions on direction or on strategy or even on message, right?
Yeah.
How did you navigate that once the 2015 campaign was getting underway?
That's a good question. I mean, we. At the end of the day, it was really important to me that everybody felt like we were on the same page, that we moved forward together, that it wasn't just a simple, 51% vote and the campaign moves forward with whatever the decision was. We wanted to make sure that everyone was fully bought in, that they felt like they had a stake in whatever we were able to achieve. And so that took a lot of relationship building. I spent a lot of time talking with folks, behind the scenes, making sure that their concerns, their priorities were being addressed in those meetings. And it wasn't just me. I mean, there were a lot of people who were doing that because thankfully that was a priority for the campaign. We wanted to make sure that everyone who was at the table was fully bought in. And in the end, people were excited about the voucher model, that shift from the super match to the voucher program. Because of the purity of the system, because it really created that floor for political voice where everyone could have an opportunity to be heard.
So, okay, that's just the work of getting your own side on side, right?
Yeah.
So now, tell me briefly, when the criticism came in, when the opponents' arguments started being heard about this is just welfare for politicians, this is a waste of taxpayer dollars, how did you all, as a campaign, deal with those arguments? Why was it that you all were able to win so handily and put those arguments down?
Well, those were some of the talking points that we'd heard all along. We kind of figured that these are the standard things that folks will trot out when they're against public financing. At the end of the day, I think there's just something that people connect with. They understand that we have infrastructure, we have sidewalks, we have police departments, we have fire departments, we have schools, we have healthcare. That these are good for society, and why wouldn't our electoral system need that similar sort of infrastructure? We need everything to be accessible. We need people to be able to run for office. We need people's voices to be heard so that they buy into the system, so that they vote and they want to actually participate. What we have now is the opposite of that. People are not engaging. Campaigns are funded overwhelmingly by some of the wealthiest folks in our city. It's approximately 1% of our city's population that actually funds political campaigns. And so the intention behind this was really to make that connection for folks and make sure that community-based groups were educating their members that this is an opportunity for them to take power and to really engage in the system.
Last question for you. What advice would you have for other organizers in other cities or other states who want to create something similar and get something similar off the ground?
Well, I think one lesson that I learned is that there's a lot of power in going the initiative route and really thinking about how you can bring as many individual community stakeholders to the table to figure out what people want, and really making sure that the campaign is of the people and really driven by the people. I think and connected to that, there's an opportunity to authentically engage communities of color and really the new American majority, which people talk about, communities of color, women, young people. Oftentimes these are communities that are less likely to vote, and that's one of the big problems we see in the campaign cycle. Limited amount of money, limited amount of time, and so people focus on the 51% of the most likely voters. I think this campaign really showed that by engaging authentically these communities and these community-based organizations in driving this work, we can be much more successful, and we can inspire folks to want to get engaged.
Well, Esteban, thanks so much for coming and telling us a little bit more about how it happened and how these pieces came together. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
We've been hearing from Esteban Munoz Howard, one of the lead organizers of the campaign that created Democracy Vouchers. The system is getting put into place as we speak, and in January 2017, the first of the vouchers will get sent out. But before that, the city will be sending information to citizens of Seattle, educating them on the process of how to use and how to spend these vouchers in city elections. So why did we choose Democracy Vouchers as our case study today? Well, in some ways, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This image of where political donors live in the city of Seattle is really telling. But when you combine it with a couple of other images, something aligns. This image of where the wealthiest neighborhoods are in Seattle, and this one where the whitest neighborhoods are in Seattle, you see the incredible overlap, the alignment between these three maps. Well, that alignment is the same alignment and concentration of opportunity and civic power that you see not only on campaign finance issues and not only in Seattle, but on a range of issues all across the United States. Now, one of the things about Democracy Vouchers is that it also helps us illuminate the different dimensions of citizen power that we've been talking about. Of course, fundamentally, it's about wealth. And then it's an idea here to try to equalize the power of wealth. You had to get numbers of people involved in order to make a change to public policy, either through city council or directly to the people. And once you decided to go to the people, you had to change norms about what was okay about who has voice in our city. And the amazing thing about all of these is the ways in which they aligned one to another and create this matrix. Now, on this issue, physical force didn't really come into play, but this kind of map is true of so many issues in civic life across so many domains. And on our show here, we're going to try not only to explain it through case studies like Democracy Vouchers, but also simply by having conversations with you, the viewers, and hearing from you and some of the questions that you might have. So we've actually asked for a few questions on social media, and the first one here is this: how do I assert my civic power without reinforcing the privileges I have? Keyword privileges. I think there's a really simple answer here to Bob and Ramsey's question. You have to see it, you have to own it, and you have to circulate it. Are you willing to admit the kinds of privileges, whether it's white privilege, whether it's gender privilege, whether it's class privilege? Are you willing to own it and say, you know what, I'm not going to be defensive about this, I'm not going to try to deny it? And then are you going to circulate it? Am I going to be somebody who, once I realize what I have and what advantages I have in my life, I'm going to hoard those advantages? Or am I going to, for the good of the community, think about ways that I can circulate that opportunity, that power, that voice? We created this show because fundamentally we believe that when you circulate it, the city is stronger. We're all better off when we're all better off civically as well as materially. And so the second question we got on social media brings up a different angle of the question. Can you harness the power of social media to increase civic engagement? How can we turn tweets into meaningful action? You know, this is a big question right now in this age of protest, whether it's on immigration or minimum wage or criminal justice reform. But when I see a tweet like this, something comes to mind very simply for me, and that is hashtag Black Lives Matter. To me, the arc of evolution of Black Lives Matter answers this question. It began as something that was just on Twitter to express voice and frustration, to give people who didn't have power in civic life an ability to aggregate their wants and needs and their voices. But now there's a pivot that's happening. You have Black Lives Matter activists who are deciding to run for office. You have activists who are mobilized by this hashtag, thinking about how in every community they can coalesce and apply pressure to policymakers and public officials to change the way policing happens, to change the opportunity grid in our communities. And so this way of making that pivot is super important when we think about changing social media power into meaningful action. The last thing that I'll say about this, though, on all these kinds of questions, is that really, when you think about how we engage one another, it's a matter of mutual learning, constant mutual learning. And so for us at Citizen University TV, we want to learn continuously from you. We want to invite you to send us your ideas, your questions, stories that you want to share, and you can tweet us at Seattle Channel, hashtag CitizenUTV. Do that. And we will enjoy hearing your stories and your questions, and we will put them on the show, because for us, this is about a conversation with the community. So send us your questions. Well, that wraps it up for our very first episode of Citizen University TV. We hope you've enjoyed it. Today we got to explore some of the building blocks of civic power, some of the core elements of what it means to be able to have voice and agency in civic life. In future episodes, we're going to go deeper. In fact, in our next episode, we're going to explore this question of how you convert protest into power. We hope you'll join us then. I'm Eric Liu. This is Citizen University TV. Thank you for watching.